Coming up, Shawn Tuma joins me today as a co-host and a guest. So you should thank me now for paying that legal bill. But we're going to talk about how do you make the legal case for cyber risk management, and our very first audience-driven segment where we explore the attorney-client privilege. We sort out some of the good advice from the misinformation you might have picked up. In our Innovation Update 16, that's right, 16 updates, including 5 exits, Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Business Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by, are you getting pressure to improve your data security? Would you like a faster, easier, better way to patch? Then you need to check out Automox. Automox is a cloud-native platform that patches and manages every endpoint, even remote servers and devices, including Windows, Mac, Linux, and third-party software from a single dashboard. Improve your cyber hygiene, reduce your attack surface, and save 90% of the effort you spend patching. Automox, your patching system of record. Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending your assets? Have you penetration tested your public assets? Start 2018 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night.
Hello and welcome. Business Security Weekly, episode 81, recorded on Monday, April 16th, 2018. That's right, we made a change. This is the show. Now, this part hasn't changed. We're still exploring the business of security so that we can improve the security of business. We want to be your trusted source where we look at leadership, innovation, communication, and the skills that you need to be successful in today's turbulent and always changing security environment. I am Michael Santarcangelo, your straight talking guide to help you translate your value and understanding to overcome friction, all sorts of great stuff. So a couple updates. I managed to take a couple weeks off. And then Paul is off this week, so I'm joined by Shawn Tuma. We'll bring him in a second. But just a couple quick updates. We shifted to Mondays, and we did this so that we could start your week with all the energy, and frankly, so that we'd have that energy. So from now on, it's going to be live streamed Mondays, 1 o'clock. You can always join in, and you can shoot us comments on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and we'll respond to them live. And of course, you can always write in. We love doing that type of stuff. In fact, that's what drove our second segment today with our friend Shawn Tuma. So Shawn I've known Shawn for a long time, consider him a good friend. I'm honored to call him a friend. And we had him on the program, and it was great feedback. And then Paul's on vacation. I said, I got an idea. So, Shawn, thanks for stepping into the hot seat here and co-hosting and guesting and sharing your knowledge and everything. But welcome back to Business Security Weekly, now as a co-host.
Hey, thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be back, and enjoyed the last time we got to visit here, and looking forward to a great show today.
Me too. All right, so let me just make a quick announcement so I don't forget, and then we're going to get into this first concept that we're going to talk about today. Webcast with Distill Networks. The year bad bots went mainstream. That's going to come up next Wednesday, April 25th. You're not going to want to miss this. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. Register now, securityweekly.com/Distill Networks, 1L, DISTIL Networks. And you can be part of that, and you'll enjoy that. All right, so those of you that haven't seen Shawn before or didn't get a chance to check out the previous episode where he joined us, he's a pretty experienced cybersecurity and data privacy attorney and a partner at Scheef Stone. And so what that means is he's somebody who's been doing this long enough. In fact, Shawn, I guess you got your start here around 1999. So you're one of those folks like me, like a lot of the hosts on this network that have 2 decades or so of experience doing this. And that's one of the things I've always appreciated about working with you is that you really have a sense of what's happening in the world of security and the legal side and where they intersect. It's been a lot of fun. Shawn and I have partnered together on podcasts and on panels and on writing and all sorts of fun stuff. So it's pretty exciting for me to have him here today. Did I miss anything, Shawn, that we should talk about?
No, I think you got it all. The biggest thing, Michael, is I got started in this before Y2K. That was supposed to be my rocket ship to stardom and early retirement. As we all know, it didn't work out that way, but I can assure you we're not dealing with Y2K anymore.
No, it's funny how that was. I can remember the planes were going to fall and the computers were going to stop, and it was, whew, and then I guess not. It didn't. All right, so when you and I got started around this, one of the trends that's come up a lot, and we've had people talk more about third-party risk management. It's a challenge our industry is still getting their hands around. And in fact, in our update section, with the 16 different updates, there's some interesting trends there looking at what are features versus platforms versus solutions that people are taking a look at. So I reached out to you and I said, all right, so talking about third-party risk, what do we need to know? And you said, well, actually, Michael, pull the lens back a little bit. It's a little bit bigger. And you've been out talking about how to make the legal case for cyber security, the legal case for cyber risk management. And I think it's interesting because, I saw even again last week, people still, frankly, wasting time arguing whether they like cyber or not. But in this case, what you're talking about is it's not just an IT problem anymore, and there's actually a legal case to be made around some of that. So what was the genesis of this for you? I know you've done it as a talk a little bit. You give us some high notes here, but what started this for you?
Well, Michael, one of the things I'm always trying to figure out how to do is take the complexities of the legal environment, which are bad enough, add those to the complexities of the cybersecurity, cyber risk environment in general, and then figure out how to distill that down into something simple enough that business executives who really don't want to learn about this stuff, they don't lay awake at night and think, oh man, I really want to geek out on cyber stuff. They want to do business. So how do I take that and make it simple enough where they can digest it? And one of the things that really hit me one day, it was in the middle of a presentation when I was trying to make this point. I stopped and I thought about it, and I just looked at him and I said, guys, you know how you've heard about Target data breach, and you know how you've heard about Home Depot and Neiman Marcus, and and these days Uber and Equifax and all that. It's like, why do you think you know about these breaches? And they all kind of looked at me with this dumb look. And I said, you think it's because they're just good corporate citizens and they're ethical and they want to air their dirty laundry to the public? Or you think there's another reason? It's because it's a legal issue. They're required to tell you of this. And if there's no other reason to understand simply why cyber is a legal issue, ask yourself, why do you think you know about all this happening? Because the laws made them do it. And what more do you need to know? The laws govern this area, and it's clearly a business risk issue, and now it's clearly a legal risk issue. And you've got to have all those units together to understand the risk and then to start working towards managing it.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I guess it's an important distinction because a lot of us have looked at this for years and we've said, when will the government do something? When will there be more regulations? And congratulations, now we have more. Debate later whether that's good or bad, but that's kind of where we sit. So what becomes interesting in all of that when we take a look at it is now that means you need legal involved. Now that means the board has a responsibility. Now that means the executives, they have a different view. But I think you said something that was kind of important too, which is, but they still want to run a business. They still have a business to run. That still becomes what's important to everybody. So you've got an interesting phrase I've seen you say before, which is, security protects companies' data, legal protects companies from their data. How does that explain that a little bit more and tell us how that plays then into this shifting paradigm?
Well, when you think about the nature of data, I mean, security, IT, their job is to deal with the technical side of data and to make sure that all of the appropriate technical and administrative and whatnot safeguards are in place. But data is risk in today's environment. The more data you have, the more risk you have. In fact, I was speaking to a group of CISOs a couple of weeks ago, and I put it to them like this. I was like, data carries liability. Data is the hot potato. And I had them all repeat that after me. And I told them, it sounds stupid, but you'll never forget this. Data is like radioactive material now. It has a lot of good and a lot of value. I heard a few weeks ago someone said data is the new oil. I kind of agree with that. Mm-hmm. But data carries the risk of, the BP explosion as well. And so what legal's role is to understand the fact that, number one, we're never, cybersecurity at its basic root is a human nature problem. It's bad people who found an efficient tool for doing bad things. We're not going to solve cybersecurity until we solve human nature. And neither one of us are going to hold our breath waiting for that. So what we have to do is say, okay, understanding the risks of this environment, how do we take data and how do we help within an organization of managing it in a way so that we reduce the legal and regulatory liability risks that companies face when dealing with data. And that's what legal's role is. We are there to help companies take what they have and then figure out how to reduce the risk to the company for what's going to happen, because of that data. And if you think about it, as a breach guide or breach quarterback, I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen a lot of cases of what companies have done well, what they've not done well, the things that have gotten them in trouble, the things that have gotten them out of difficult situations. Attorneys who have that kind of experience bring that experience to bear with the companies we're dealing with now to help them resolve the problems they have and make them more manageable. We're not trying to get perfect. We know that can't happen, but we're trying to manage it and make it better. And so our goal is to help companies, manage that data risk.
There's an interesting point there, and I keep running it through my head. Because as some folks know, I've always talked about what we call minimum viable security. It's the concept of you've got to do the minimum, but you need to be viable. So what does that look like? And then layer on from that. What you're talking about is that if data is the new oil, there is a risk of having too much of it because that makes it really attractive. And then you've got to think about protecting it differently. And I'm sure there's a whole commodities play thinking about how and what we protect and what acceptable losses are and such. And I think there's still a lot of people that figure that because storage is cheap, or at least cheaper than it used to be, more data, collecting in more places, doing more things is good. And you're saying, well, no, actually, that might really work against you. You also talked about seeing stuff, the things that are working, the things that aren't. You talked this last time about reasonable security. And is that where we start looking at making this legal case? Is that where that concept of reasonable security starts to come in? Because we're talking about the benefits of this information, the risk of this information, how and what we need to do to protect it, what we're expected to do from a regulatory or other perspective. So just refresh people quick on what reasonable security is and then how that's going to fit into how we look at this.
Well, there's a lot of points you covered in that, Michael. One is going back to the data and the notion that more data equals more risk. I think, starting from the business standpoint, look, I'm a business attorney first and foremost. I recognize that if the business can't stay operational and profitable and keep its doors open, nobody cares how good their cybersecurity or data protection practices are. They have to be able to do business first. And so taking that and then looking at the point of understanding your data, because of the value of data, and like you said, the cheap storage and this notion of tomorrow we may find a new way to monetize it that we don't know of today, we tend to be hoarders of data. We just, if we can keep it, we keep it, and we don't really think about the risks it carries with us. But the first step, in my view, towards reaching reasonable security is assessing your risks, the risk environment that you're in. And that requires looking at your jurisdictions, your laws, your regulations, your industry, the nature of your business, what you take in, what you process. But at the end of the day, what we're always focused on are two things: protecting our networks and protecting our data. Now, let me tell you, the regulators don't care that much about your networks. They care about the data on your networks. And so really that focuses this inquiry down to one thing: how do we protect our data to keep ourselves out of legal and regulatory trouble? And the first step is we have to know what we have. How can we protect what we don't even know is out there? And the more data we have, the more we have to protect. And the more requirements we're going to have to go through to protect these different categories of data. So really, when we understand that from a legal and a regulatory standpoint, it all comes back down to the data. And then we have to know where that data is. And then we have to start looking at things like our company, our abilities to protect, the financial resources we have, the disruption to business that we can take on, things like that. Then we start working our way towards that continuum on one end of boiling the ocean and doing everything. And on the other end, that check the box of saying, I don't care, I just want to do what I have to do. And somewhere in that middle is where we reach that zone of reasonableness where we want to be as companies.
Are you finding, I think a lot of people in security have been frustrated for years at how challenging it is to discover what we have. Just from a device perspective, now we think about all the cloud applications, we think about all the different ways people can store information, all the different things, and this whole concept of structured and unstructured data. But as I've been listening to you, Shawn, and you're talking about the way that things are kind of shifting, are you starting now to see where legally, if I say, oh, it was just so much information, it's so vast, I couldn't even know where to begin. Like, that's not only not going to work for you, that's going to incur some ire from the court system, because by this point, they're expecting that you've got some duty to figure it out. Are we at that point, or are we approaching that point? Where are we at when you think about it that way?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard. I think it is one of the most, if not the most difficult aspects of managing your risk, is to know where that data is, who has it, who's doing what with it. And I don't think the courts in the cases have thought this far in advance yet. I think we're definitely getting there. And when we look to analogous areas of law, we do see that you do have a duty to know where your data is. You have a duty to know what assets you have. Look at e-discovery, for example. You know, in the e-discovery world, a company is responsible for its data, wherever it may reside, and when in litigation, it has to produce that data. And if it doesn't, it can be sanctioned, and it can get, adverse inferences against it in a trial for not having access to that data. And there's no difference as we see these cyber liability type cases progress, and they haven't made much progress yet, but they're making some, and they're going to get there. We're going to see in court cases that you are absolutely required to know where your data is and to have access and control over it. But I think the regulators now, they are getting more sophisticated, and they do understand this concept very well. And you're not going to be able to get by with just saying, my employees uploaded that to their Dropbox, so I'm not really worried about it. Or, I gave that to a vendor and they didn't bother to protect it, but hey, it's not my fault, it's the vendor's fault. Go talk to them. That's not going to fly. And here's an example that you and I've talked about before, Michael, a lot, is the computer hacking cases, the CFAA cases. And here in the Fifth Circuit, if an employee or an insider misuses their access and it's in violation of a clearly known policy or prohibition, then they can be charged with violating the CFAA. And that's the rule of law here in the Fifth Circuit. But even then, courts look at companies when they come into court and they say, Judge, we had this employee misuse their access. We want you to punish them. And the courts say, well, wait a minute. What did you do to protect against them misusing that access? Why did they even have access to your company financials when it's the assistant sitting at the front desk? Things like that. We have a responsibility to protect ourselves and protect our data. And so, courts are working their way through this, but, hell, I almost forgot where I was started with all this, but we can't just ignore it.
No, and I mean, listen, as I'm listening to explain these things. I'm always interested in, how do I reach out to somebody in my legal team? How do I reach out to these different groups? And what can I offer to them so I don't sound like I'm just the party of no, or the person who's in security, I'm here to stop you, or whatever. And what you're giving us and what you're giving the folks in the audience is this chance to look at it and say, well, wait a minute. Too much data could be too much risk. I've got certain obligations. And look, maybe it's you as the security person, but the organization has certain obligations, and you can be part of the solution. You can be part of the team helping them do that, keeping their focus on making that business. So then talk to me, Shawn. I mean, and I think there's two aspects to this. So I'd like you to handle both of them, but I'm going to set it up in terms of then who should lead this cyber risk management program. One of the things that's been interesting in security is we talk about, where should we report? Do we report to the CIO? Do we report directly to the CEO? Do we report up through CFO? But what I've started to see more is people reporting up to the chief legal officer or the chief risk officer, who is the in-house counsel. So I'm kind of curious then, the role of an attorney to oversee this program, both as an insider, in-house counsel, and as an outsider, somebody that you retain. What do people need to think about with this?
Well, and this is not a sales pitch, but I think that from an organizational standpoint, ultimately, it works very well when in-house counsel is the focal point of this risk management program for a multitude of reasons. One is it's the nature of our jobs as attorneys to know how to analyze a bunch of complex units and that are interrelated and working together, and to try to understand those and break them down and see the risk that's present there. And as an attorney in-house, you're there to solve risk. And so is like a chief risk officer or someone like that. But with legal, you intersect with so many different units of the organization. You have to be tied in with the business functions. You have to be tied in with the CFO. You have to be tied in with HR. You have to be tied in with the technical side, the IT, the security. And ultimately, because cyber is a problem that covers the whole gamut of risks within an organization, you need someone that's comfortable with all of those different risks. And one of the biggest reasons is, look, you need a close alignment between your technical, your security people, and your legal counsel, because you both have a vested interest in managing this risk and in getting the ear of the C-suite and the board of directors. And unfortunately, right now, your CIO, your CISO, your privacy officer, whomever, they don't yet have that kind of influence many times that your chief legal officer or your in-house counsel does. So I think it's essential that they're at the top of this pyramid, so to speak. But as far as in-house versus outside counsel goes, a lot of that depends on the size of the organization and the resources within the organization. There are some very large multinational corporations out there that have teams of in-house legal counsel who are very, very skilled at cybersecurity and cyber risk. I don't know that they necessarily need outside counsel as far as having an effective risk management program goes. I think they're very skilled and have the ability to do that. But then there are some who may not have that large of a legal department and may not have that expertise. And while they may have the legal skills, they don't have the experience in the cyber risk realm. And for them, I think it's essential that they have outside counsel for the knowledge and the experience that we have. And then obviously your smaller companies, if they don't have dedicated in-house counsel, then it's really essential for them as well.
And we're going to talk about attorney-client privilege in the next segment. But on this, you go out, and I've seen that you do a lot of work in the legal community and you do a lot of work in the security community. Are you finding that both parties then are kind of warming up to the notion? Like, is it like when you go to the legal side now and you talk about these issues, are you met with a good to know and good, I'm having these conversations now? Are people still sitting there saying, Shawn, what are you talking about? Same thing on the security side. When you go and you're presenting legal constructs, are you finding more people are saying, hey, this was helpful to me. I went and had a good conversation with my legal officers and this is going great. Or are you still finding people going, I should go talk to legal? Like where, based on your just pulse check of that, are we doing a better job at aligning ourselves and talking? Or is one side kind of pushing faster than the other? Or what have you learned in the process?
Well, we're making a lot of progress, Michael. We've come a long way since 2014 when we really had the big wake-up call with all the notorious breaches. But we still have a long way to go. You know, there's this misconception out there, and my agenda item for 2018 is to dispel this misconception. Okay, in 2011, I couldn't get people to talk to me about cyber risk or data breaches, even if I'd have paid them to do it. All I heard was, Shawn, we've heard this nonsense out of you before with Y2K. Please go away. Okay. 2014, we got a wake-up call, and people started being willing to listen and even spend a little bit of money. But you know what the mindset was, you know, yay, pat us on the back. We now recognize cyber as a risk, and we're going to give you a little bit of the pie over here, just a few bites, but you should pat us on the back because we're doing better and we've at least acknowledged it now. But we expect it to be easy because we're not going out of our way for the cyber stuff, and we expect it to be cheap because we don't have the money to spend on it. Okay, that's what I've encountered up until now. And in the last quarter of 2017, I started seeing a shift where companies are willing to spend more and pay more for cyber risk management. But we have to dispel the notion that cybersecurity is going to be either cheap or easy, because it's neither of those. But it's important, so you have to. So that leads into my answer to your question, which is we've made a lot of progress. People are learning that, you know, in the legal side, they're learning now that this is becoming more of a legal risk, and they're willing to talk to people who can help them manage it. But they're still fighting for enough budget to do the things they need to do. On the security side, they're starting to understand that they need to have legal involved. You know, in the past, they've thought of things like risk management and certainly incident response as this belongs to security. By God, we don't need anybody else in here. And we're seeing a shift to that, but it's rare still, and we've got to do more education on that point.
Is there a topic that you find is a good way? I mean, again, as I'm listening to you, thinking, all right, if I'm a CISO or security leader, I was going to reach out to my counsel, in-house or otherwise, and just kind of have that friendly chat around security. Do you have suggestions on what that lead-in could be like, as opposed to, I'm from security and I'm going to tell you what you need to know? How do we start some of those conversations?
You know, what I usually do, Michael, is I tend to spend more time talking to people in security, usually the CISOs, and I tell them, look, I'm here to help you. I know that you know what needs to be done. You're fighting for budget and approval and resources. Use me and what I'm about to tell you as the reason for getting your legal counsel and your C-suite to pay attention to this. And then what I ask them to do is to introduce me to their legal counsel, because oftentimes they'll say, you know, Shawn, I've had these conversations with my legal counsel and they just don't get it, or they don't care, or they don't understand it. And that's when I tell them, look, you know, I don't like to go off on wild goose chases, but if there's a way I can truly help, introduce me. Let's go to lunch. Let's have a phone call. Let me explain this to them off the clock. You know, and then if they decide it's something they want to move forward with, great, let's do it. But right now, we're still talking different languages. And unfortunately, we have a lot of attorneys who are what I call new experts at this, who a couple of years ago, they were doing something else. And they're still going around selling our role as legal counsel as nothing more than carrying a privilege with us. And notice I haven't mentioned that word. until now, because I don't think it's that important. And we'll talk about that. But we have to understand our role ourselves. And look, I'd be lying if I told you that 2 years ago, I understood my role as being what it is, how I understand it today. And 2 years before that, because as this whole environment's evolving, we are all having to evolve with it to understand where we fit in and where we can provide value. And look, what I see my role as being today may very well change in 2 years if people start educating themselves on many of these basics and being able to do it themselves. So the best way to do it, it starts with an introduction and say, let me just talk to them. I'm not here to step on anybody's toes. I don't want to make anybody look bad. I want to help facilitate this. And I've got a lot of that from you over the years, Michael. Let's take the friction out of it and let's just talk.
Yeah, no, I'll point this out too. You brought up the privilege, which was the perfect segue to our next segment. But I'll end this segment on this. Shawn's pointed out something that I realized a number of years ago, and he's making me remember that it exists and persists. We're busy and under the gun, as are our colleagues in legal, as are our colleagues in marketing, as are our colleagues in sales. And finding that common ground becomes ever so important, because when we're going to need it, we need to already have those types of relationships. But it's not like everybody else is sitting around. We've got to go find stuff that's interesting to them. We'll keep doing that. But we're going to take a quick break. When you come back, we're going to get into that idea of privilege. In the meantime, check us out, securityweekly.com. We got so many shows. We cover so many cool topics. Something for you to check out. And if you haven't checked them out in a while, look forward to seeing what you've got. And then we'll come back. We'll talk about attorney-client privilege in security.